Previously on The Outsider.
Here's what we found at the barn.
Showed up a month ago, and I thought it was in regards to Terry, but she didn't even know he was dead. Whatever did happen, I need to find out who was working the days of the Maitlands visit.
You need to call that detective.
What's the message?
He said if you don't stop, something very bad is going to happen.
Whatever you need me to do. Whatever you need me to do.
Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of Talking the Outsider. I'm your host, Kinte, all the way live from Los Angeles, and I'm joined by my one and only co-host, Jen. How you doing, Jen?
I'm doing good. Kinte was kind enough to let me know that sometimes in the background, it sounds like Jurassic Park. That's actually because I'm in Hawaii, which is sort of home to at least some of the shooting of Jurassic Park, but also because we just have a billion birds here. So apologies to anyone who doesn't like nature. You just kind of have to suffer through it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure some people were probably wondering what was going on. It is what it is, birds. And hey, it is what it is.
I don't actually live in an aviary. It just sounds like I do.
Are you sure about that?
I'm actually very sure. Yes. I think Hawaii is just one gigantic aviary. So, yes.
Well, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm looking forward to talking about this episode. This is episode 4 that we're going to be covering, which is our 5th episode of the podcast. And this one, El Coco.
This is where we get the real meat of what is probably happening.
Yes, and we can actually talk about it a little bit. So let's start off with this episode, how it starts off. And we actually have our character who committed suicide in the last episode, Mr. Hostetler. I'm gonna say Hostetler until somebody wait, what is it? Hofstadter. My bad. It starts off with a flashback, and he's on a date with a very beautiful woman named Maria.
Right?
And as we go along, we're going to find out a little bit more about Maria. So tell me about the flashback.
Well, the basically the flashback is meant to help us set up what Holly is doing in her investigation. It also helps us, I think, to realize that the doppelganger, the entity that we know is mimicking other people, is doing so in a very connected kind of way. One thing that I found super interesting about how the two of these guys connected was how stilted Maria's actual language was. Like, clearly that was probably not Maria.
Right. It's potentially.
It didn't feel very natural at all. It felt really forced.
Yeah, it's potentially our outsider here.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, we'll get deeper into that. So we have in the present tense. We have Holly. She follows the receptionist home, and she gets sprayed in the face.
That's right.
And with mace, and then she, first of all, I've never been sprayed in the face with mace, but I know that it doesn't feel good, So, so this starts this encounter with, I believe her name is Angela, and they are going to start having a conversation, a dialogue. This is in the novel, but the Mace part is for the TV show, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about what the outcome of this.
Well, what we discover, I think almost maybe not by accident, but sort of by in an interesting way. We discover that the receptionist has some theories of her own. And I think that those theories help Holly start putting together things that make a little bit more sense, because because we hear the receptionist talk about Heath, who is the one of the people who was accused of the horrific murder, and she says it's like it wasn't Heath at all.
Right.
And that is also, in direct parallel to what we saw with Maria in the beginning, where Maria clearly doesn't seem to be acting like a normal person. And I think that, this is one of the limits that this entity has. It even though it is able to access a lot, it certainly can't access everything. It doesn't create for itself a perfect copy of whatever person that it's trying to imitate is.
No, not at all. It doesn't do that. And one thing that's cool about this is that it starts to give you kind of insight on what it can do, what it can't do, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? So
it also sets up the thing with the postcard where we find out that that Maria is in New York City. We find out basically that Maria is still alive. Right. And then Holly heads over to New York City in order to see if she can find out any more information.
Yeah. So, my bad. I made sure we got to make sure that is revealed to the audience. Now, as Holly is trying to get more information about what's going on, she is able to get into the senior assistant place, and she has a conversation with Terry Maitland's father, and I'm gonna play an audio clip from that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My name is
I know
Holly.
who you are. You don't have to tell me.
Well, that's good. I wanted to ask you a few questions about Heath Hofstetter.
Yeah, I remember you. You were playing cards with my grandmother in St. Louis. You had 4 jacks. She had 4 queens. The look on your face.
The last time you saw Heath, do you remember?
But your husband gave you a sharp smack that night. Am I right?
Did Heath talk to you about what was happening?
I told my
him?
wife the bedroom was too cold. So what did she do? She set fire to the bed. It wasn't him, you know.
Wasn't who?
You know. He really did fool all of you, didn't he?
Back on and then get it boiling.
All right. So I wanted to play that audio because this is definitely a departure from the novel. I don't remember the scene in the book.
No.
And what do you think it means?
Well, this sort of ties in with, and I've mentioned this a couple of times. There's a couple of tropes that run through this. One of them is that the very innocent, meaning the very young, and sometimes the very old, especially as they descend into dementia, are able to see things that we are not privy to, that we don't get to notice because we have stopped paying attention to that realm. And, to be honest, I mentioned this in our very first pilot episode. The central core of what we're dealing with here, all the way up through this episode, is belief. It's what do you believe and how do you believe it? And in this case, Terry Maitland's father somehow, although we can clearly see that he is in the throes of dementia, is somehow able to see very clearly into the fact that that was not him. And again, it's almost expertly done, because it does feel like people who are suffering from dementia may have nothing to sort of cast into an observation. But if Holly hadn't gone to ask him, I feel like that might have been an open, unexplored sort of avenue to go down. It's like it's one more piece of evidence that feels like, okay, there's something else here that isn't just that it's more than just there's all these different coincidences and all of these different overlapping timelines. There's definitely something here that is creating the mimic, the mimic piece. I am struggling a little bit with how to say this. Of course, knowing that, like I said before, I've read the books, and there's a bit more information down the road. But for the moment, I think the best thing that we can say right now is that he sees something, or he saw something that nobody else seemed to see, except either the people that really knew him very well, or the people who are dealing with things that allow them to see stuff that most of us don't see. I need to sort of backtrack back to our last episode and remind people that Jessa, Terry's daughter, mentioned and actually asked for a meeting with Ralph to say that the entity told her, nondescript, because he now has a very blurry face, said, don't pursue this any further or something bad is going to happen. Now, why would the entity present itself to the child and not to somebody else? And I think that it has a lot to do with why Terry Maitland's father was also able to see through this. And that is that it really takes the suspension of belief, or the suspension of disbelief, in order to make sense of this, in order to have it actually be what it is. Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm saying?
It makes perfect sense. It feeds off of that, and that's why it's so important. And, in the novel, there's a direct reference to the importance of belief. And I guess we'll wait till we get into that. But so I totally agree that, and you're starting to see like this overall thread that keeps running of this kind of thing. Now,
I loved that scene, by the way. I loved it because it was such an incredible juxtaposition between Terry clearly suffering from dementia, and so far as to recognize Holly as somebody completely different, and still have the clarity and peace of mind to be able to know that what he saw was not, that he had everybody fooled. I feel like that was actually really well done.
Now, Holly has a encounter with a bartender, a woman who's a bartender, and they have an interesting conversation. I'm gonna play a clip from that. Okay.
Man comes here from Georgia, bumps into someone who's accused of killing 2 children,
Okay.
goes back to Georgia, and 4 weeks later is accused of a crime just like it.
These men, they knew each other beforehand.
I doubt it.
Maybe you caught something from the first guy.
Can't catch murder. It's not a virus.
No, it isn't. But if it was a virus, you'd have to ask yourself, how did the first guy catch it? You know, who gave it to him? Because that's one hell of a bug.
Can I get a coffee to go?
I like that. I like that scene.
This is where she starts to put together the idea of the scratch
Right.
and why the scratch was so important that Terry got.
Right. And I like that though. They, you can't catch murder. It's not a virus. But then she says, but if it is a virus,
The-
how could,
It was definitely that dialogue a lot of dialogue around Holly is actually really well done, but that dialogue in particular makes me remember why the character of Holly is so good. People around her tend to get a kind of clarity when they talk to her, which is also sort of interesting because her dialogue is anything but clear. Sometimes it's very muddy.
yeah. So yeah, which is it is kind of funny though when you start thinking about her character and the way that she views things and whatnot, and the last thing, the thought of that that you do get clarity from anything that she says,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of funny.
It's
But
fascinating.
it is fascinating, that's for sure. So one thing too, we didn't play that part of the clip that she does she enlists the bartender to be her driver the next day, and she offers her money. So
That's right.
yeah. Okay. So a scene. Okay. So Maria, who we see in the Maria, who we see in the flashback, who had a connection to Heath, we find out that she is in fact was convicted of a murder very similar to Terry and Heath's crime.
Right.
And she's still alive doing time. And as you said, there's the connection with the postcard. And so she goes, Holly goes and visits her in, I believe it was Rikers Island, because they're in New York right now. And so she has this conversation with Maria where Maria is like, she seems to know what's going on with her more so than anyone else. Maybe that's why she's still alive. And she seems to come to some sort of acceptance, even though she tells Holly, like, I didn't do this, but I have to kind of live with it. And she seems to be very scared. While she's having this conversation, another lady, a Spanish lady, is overhearing the conversation, and she leaves her a card.
Right.
Before we get into the Spanish lady who leaves Holly a card, what do you think about this idea that possibly Maria knows what's going on, unlike Terry and Heath?
Well, I'm going to sort of jump a little bit here into the idea which I think Outsider is supposed to be conveying, which is the more you believe, the harder it is for the entity to control the enigmatic stuff that happens around you. And I'm trying to be very careful with my words because I really don't want to spoil what happens next if people haven't seen it. But there is a kind of an all-encompassing mood that says to us, if you pour your belief into what this entity is, if you embrace it, then it seems to move on differently. It doesn't seem to hold on to quite as or maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. It seems like there is less of an impact. However, I'm gonna say that this is where there are some, I think, plot issues with the story.
Yeah.
Maria clearly seems to have some kind of understanding of what's going on, or at the very least has a suspicion. And of course, she can't say what she thinks her suspicion is. They'd lock her up and say she was totally crazy and whatever. But what happens here is it almost feels like this is just a scene to get Holly to have the scene with the next character. And I'm not saying that this doesn't work, but it feels like there was no reason for Maria to really sort of embrace and understand everything. She wasn't being used. She didn't have the thing on her neck. I mean, none of that stuff kind of made any sense. The only thing that I could think of was that they were trying to say that culturally, she has an understanding of what this might be that perhaps most other cultures do not have. Like, we don't really have a cultural understanding of what this entity might be because we just don't embrace it.
And
Right?
she's Hispanic too. And it's a Spanish legend. So maybe that, you can add that to why,
right.
And also the thing we need to say is that Maria is a lesbian, the real Maria. And he had a sexual encounter with we're going to just say it's Maria's doppelganger.
Right.
Where we actually see the scratch being done during their sexual encounter.
Right.
So, which is a big departure. That's why she doesn't even, as far as Maria knows, this is a guy that hit on her. She shined him on, but the doppelganger went and, closed the deal. So, right. So this is a scene, we got to play it. I'm going to play the audio from it, where Holly goes and meets the woman, Miss Castro, and starts to get some understanding of what she's dealing with. So I'm gonna play the audio, and then we'll get into what we think about this.
Back and back it goes. El Coco.
Duérmete, niño, duérmete ya, que viene el cuco y te comerá.
Sleep, child. Sleep now.
Else cuco comes and eats you. El Cuco, Jumbi, met an old Russian woman once who called hers Baba Yaga.
The boogeyman.
If you like. All the old cultures have the bad habit of turning truth into fairy tales. When we tell our children about El Cuco, we say, if you misbehave, it'll take you away and eat you. What we should tell them is, it doesn't matter either way. It takes what it wants.
You keep saying it.
It can look like a person if it needs to be, but it's not.
It's not.
This day and age, we find it so difficult to believe in anything that we can't explain.
Not me.
Not you. The woman you visited, I heard her say that her father and uncle were killed. Was this before or after the child was murdered?
A few weeks after she was arrested.
And the little boy, who else in his family has died since they found him?
His mother. Why?
Because it is also known as el glotón para dolor, the grief eater. It takes the child itself, but after, it likes to linger because it craves the pain of the ones left behind. If the child is its meal, the suffering of the family is its dessert.
All right.
So in the background of that clip, you hear the clock ticking. And it's important, I think, narratively, that we realize that they are in a that the metaphor here is they are up against the clock. That we know that he is transforming. There is a sense of time urgency for Holly to figure out what's going on. And this is a very important clue for her to have.
Yes. It's very convenient that she runs into someone who can fill in the blanks like that. But hey.
True.
Huh?
That's true.
So, but it's one of those, hey, the script say so. But
it doesn't feel Deus Ex Machina. It doesn't feel like it just solves, it does feel very coincidental, but it really doesn't feel like, oh my God, it's so contrived that it's going to throw us off for the rest of the story.
Well, I thought it was kind of silly, but and by the way, El Coco is a real urban legend as well. So this is deep. This is rooted in something that's real. At least the legend is real. So as we go along, we're going to get deeper into El Coco, aka the outsider, and what it possibly means. But also another thing that happens as well is the young man Merlin, who Merlin Cassidy, who stole the van. He initially lied and said he didn't see what the person who stole the van looked like, and then he came back and said he did see the person, and this is what he says the person looked like. So is that El Coco? We don't know. So, which is interesting that because in the novel, they actually saw the same person at the courthouse. They remembered seeing. They thought it was a guy who was burnt.
Right.
And but then when they looked at the tape, there was no. He wasn't on the tape, and that was one of the reasons why they were kind of like, "Hey, what's going on here?" So that is something that we are going to get deeper into. But I feel like this is a good ending point on this particular episode. I think we can go more in depth on the next episode. So, we want to be careful so we won't, anyone who's listening to this who hasn't seen the next episode, I don't want to spoil too much. So, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, Jen, how can we get you in social media and all that good stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at followingbliss1, and you can visit my newly moving website at studiowhitewolf.com.
All right. And you can get me at Kinte F on Twitter and Kinte at Kinte Ferguson on Instagram. And of course, the website is indyradio.org. That's INDY radio.org. And we will be back with a all new episode covering The Outsider. Peace.